My game dev journey started a long time ago, and even after so many years, I still didn't have a single game finished. That has changed recently as I have released my newest project, Entity Zero. Some time ago, I made a video covering the project and its goals. I also posted a video about the level generation, which, if you haven't seen it, you should definitely check it out. Today I am more than happy to say that the game is finally finished and ready to be played. You can find it on itch.io. The game link can be found in the description of this video. I still believe there are things to talk about when it comes to this game. I didn't just spend 1 year to now stay silent. So, without further ado, let's get right into it. If you haven't seen my other videos covering the project, which is very likely, then let me tell you a brief explanation of the game. Entity Zero is a horror roguelike where your main goal is to explore the unknown dimension, full of corridors and rooms. The player must collect keys to escape and win. That was the short explanation, so now let's get started. In my last video I explained how my game started generating random levels. As cool as they are, they also broke half of the game due to my code not working with the freshly new generated content. So the majority of the time was spent on adding things that already existed before. Things like items and chests. But let's focus on these levels for a moment. The way they were implemented was very simple. Every time you start the game, a level was generated. However, I quickly realized how overwhelming that might be, especially for the new players. Having to play a different level every single time can be tough on its own. The original game had a singular layout, which sped up the learning process. The player could focus on understanding new mechanics and discovering new enemies, rather than remembering the layout over and over again. I had to come up with something that would satisfy both of the parties, make the game challenging for experienced players, but not so overwhelming for the beginners. I came up with an idea to create a floor system. When the game starts, the random map generator creates a floor with a seed and a name. The name consists of a letter followed by an array of numbers. The player will be playing the same exact map until one of the two conditions is met. The first one is completing the level by winning. This benefits the experienced players as they can quickly complete one floor and just start a new one. The second one is collecting enough experience. The player can perform certain tasks such as opening chests, escaping chases, and unlocking locks to collect experience. Each task contributes to the level completion. Once the floor is completed, the player can move on to the next one. The best part is that the player doesn't need to win to proceed to the next floor. The only thing that matters is the experience gathered. This system highly benefits the new players as they have more time to understand the environment. Speaking of the environment, it has changed a lot since the last time you have seen the game. I messed around with the lighting and I got a result like this. It looks cool and atmospheric, but it made the map a whole lot darker. So to brighten it all up, I added a lantern into the game. A simple and not expensive light source that brightens up your surroundings. Speaking of lights, it wasn't that easy to add them into the game. I really wanted to add shadows to my map. However, my levels are randomly generated, which doesn't allow me to use things like baked lighting. If you have never heard about baked lighting, it's simply a process of drawing lights onto walls and other textures. This is the best way to handle lighting in a cheap but satisfying way. Since my map layout is never the same, baking lights is out of the question. I had to use real-time lighting, which works pretty much the same, but it calculates light every single frame. You can probably guess that the performance suffers a lot because of this. To resolve this problem, I wrote a system that disables any light that is either too far or not visible. Of course, this is a big oversimplification, but from the player perspective it does work like that. I wanted to spice up the gameplay a bit by giving the player some side objectives to do. I did that by adding an objective board. The board gives the player a list of tasks to do during his gameplay. The tasks vary from one to another. Some of them are simple, like collecting enough scrap or using a specific item, while others can be quite challenging and will force the player to get out of their little comfort zone. If you can even have one while playing a horror game, that is. I mentioned scrap in the last sentence, an item I have not yet talked about, so let's do that. A while ago I wanted to add some sort of a item collecting system, like the one in Dead by Daylight, where after completing the floor the player could bring the items home with him. This, however, results in something I like to call the rare potion effect. where the player never uses the item and saves it for a better time. To prevent that, I decided to introduce a currency in form of scrap. The said scrap could be found inside of chests or lying on the ground. It could also be salvaged out of items that were brought home, where the scrap could be used to buy items for your next game. Speaking of home, I also upgraded the lobby. Not only it's twice as big, but it also contains lots of interesting things. You can find a profile board with player level displayed, an objective board with current objectives, the difficulty screen, and an entirely new edition of an entity board, which displays all of the met entities. I also introduced a bunch of new enemies to the game, making for a total of 8 different entities. I don't want to spoil too much about them, but they are all pretty interesting. As an example, I will show you one of the enemies. Well, show is a big word, since this one is invisible. Meet the Wrath, a ghost-like creature that wanders around the halls. The entity is invisible, so you can't see it, but you can hear its footsteps. They help you figure out its location. The Wrath can attack the player if he gets too close. The only way to run away from the entity is to either run a lot or to hide inside of a locker. That's not all about this entity, as it has one interesting feature that informs you of his presence in your game. Every now and then the entity drops chains on the ground, which then can be found and taken notice of. I love adding little features like this because they make the in-game world more real and exciting. This is something I promised myself when I became a dev. I really like the details that some creators put in their games. Things that are not game-changing, but they are just a welcome addition. I could talk about lots of more things that have been added, like special rooms that can be generated in the level, or explain some other entities, or items even. But sadly, that is all I have planned for today. I also think that the best way to learn more about my game is to just play it, so if I got you interested, be sure to check out the game and maybe consider buying it. This would help me a lot as a game developer and would make my day. Thank you so much for watching the video, and see you in the next one.